Here is the parts that we are going to be installing into the 350Z differential. So first off, here is our 350Z diff. This could be a G35 or 350Z differential, your choice. This one specifically is an open differential from a 350Z. To go with that, we have a COS two-way carrier assembly limited slip differential. So when you order these, you have to specify whether you have an open or a VLSD differential. This one is for an open diff and a manual open differential specified when ordered. This is a 4.08 ring and pinion. The numbers on it specify that it is 49 teeth on the ring gear and 12 on the pinion. Divide that and you get 4.08. We're going to install that inside of this diff. Make this thing rowdy. What we also have is the pinion assembly, the used bearing. This is a used gear set. We're going to replace this, but obviously it came with one. Ring gear, pinion, always matched up. If you get a ring and pinion set, they can only be together no matter what. You can't put a different ring gear with a different pinion. They're mated together for life. This specific ring and pinion set that I got came from a distributor in Los Angeles. His Instagram is Get Gears Get Rowdy, and he provides the shims with these. This is nice because it's really nice to have another set of shims if you don't have any. I have a bunch, I'll show you later, but he usually throws them in, makes this process better so you can get the right backlash set up when you install it in the diff. I'm pretty sure these have to go into a manual 350Z or G35 differential housing, so just keep that in mind. When you're ordering it, if you order from him, you can also get these from Z1 Motorsports. But if you're ordering from him, I would definitely ask him and confirm that these definitely need to go into a manual open or VLSD housing. This one will go into an open manual 350Z diff. I know that for a fact. New pinion nut. This is a brand new pinion spacer. As you can see, this one came with the used one. It's already crushed. You have to crush these while you're assembling it, so you're going to want a new one. Oil seal for the sides of the differential. These are going to go here on the sides where the axle stubs go. Rear pinion seal. Well, actually, this goes on the front of the diff. If you're looking at it like this, it's the rear, but technically this is considered the front. It'll go right there. Pinion bearing. Comes with a race. Here is the part number. This is the one that goes right there on the pinion itself. It goes right there on the pinion itself. These are the side bearings. I guess they are also wheel bearings, according to this Nissan sticker, but these will go on the carrier assembly on the side. They come with races as well. And last but not least, the pinion bearing. This one goes inside the case. You will press the pinion into this bearing inside the case before you put the new seal on. It's tucked away behind the seal. So it also comes with a race, if I didn't already say that. But yeah, that's all the parts we're going to put on inside of this differential. Should make a pretty smooth good differential for this customer. So add on. In order to run a two-way limited slip differential, you need the proper fluid. This fluid comes directly from the manufacturer of this two-way. It is limited slip differential manual transmission final drive hypoid GL5 80W90 gear oil. What I usually recommend is to buy 2 bottles of this, because you're going to go through a break-in period with a two-way if you're doing this. And you're going to have to drain the oil and refill it after the break-in, and this is not enough fluid for 2 differential drain and fills. So buy 2 of these with your limited slip diff. Some people say, oh, you can run regular cheap gear oil with it for the break-in. You know what? I'm spending $1,000 on this. I'm just gonna run this gear oil the whole time. So take it as you want it. I'm gonna spend the money and do it like this every time. I want my shit to work good, so that's my recommendation. So I'm gonna do my best to show you in real time the disassembly of this differential. So first things first, you're gonna wanna drain the fluid out. I've already drained the fluid out, but I will show you anyway. You're going to want to pull this plug and this plug on the side here. Get this one out. This is your fill plug. You'll probably see some metal on the end of it. That's not a huge problem. Pretty typical. And then you're going to pull this guy, and your fluid's going to come out of this hole. I typically recommend doing this before you remove the differential from the car. Just makes it easier. That way the fluid is out and you have a clean diff, empty to deal with. Next, you're going to use a 14 mil to remove the cover bolts. These are usually siliconed on. Unlike some of the 350Z, or sorry, 240SX, where they have a paper gasket. Either way, it can be kind of a pain to break them free once you have all of the bolts out of it. So this one came free pretty quick. What I would typically do in this case is take a hammer, just kind of tap side to side. That should get the cover to come off nice and smooth. So now we're inside the differential. The next thing you're going to want to do is remove the axles from the housing itself. There's a couple ways you can do it. The main thing that sucks sometimes is when people weld these differentials, they'll weld the stubs to the inside of the diff, and then these axles aren't removable, you can't build the diff. So usually one way to tell, take your pry bar, put it right here. You can just kind of break them loose. This one came out pretty easy. You want to be careful though and not damage this. This is your reluctor ring for your ABS, as well as being kind of gentle with these. They should pop right out. Next, you're going to want to remove the bearing caps. I typically mark them before I remove them. So you got your left and your right side. If the letters are up and down, you're good. Then you're going to take a 17 and remove the bolts. So next you're going to want to remove the whole carrier assembly with the ring gear and the shims from the housing. So, ooh, there's some chunks in here. I'll show you later what's going on with this, but these shims right here are the same ones I was talking about earlier that came with that ring and pinion setup. So when you take them out, I usually like to make sure I remember what side they were on. So don't let them just fall on the floor or whatever. There's a couple ways to remove this pinion assembly. They can get kind of stuck in there. Pretty easy just to give it a quick jab. It starts coming out. So there it is. She's loose. Pull that out. Like I said, remember to keep track of the side that your shims came from. So right side, left side, as well as this, and there she is. So one of the reasons I wanted to rebuild this diff is it was definitely a catastrophic failure. I don't know if you can see that in focus, but there's some chunks of diff in here. Here's a piece of, it looks like someone welded the spider gears together and the weld came loose. It must have been a plate weld, and it fell out, locked between the ring gear and the pinion. And see if I can find it. Here's a chunk of the ring gear. It's missing completely from the ring gear itself. So yeah, this one's pretty toast, so I thought it'd be a good candidate to completely rebuild. Alright, so we're putting a new carrier into the diff, and we're not going to use this one, but for all intents and purposes I'm going to show you how to remove this ring gear. Same thing, 17 mil. Helps if you have a impact. It's pretty tough to hold this because these are all Loctited in. Alright, all the bolts are out. And a lot of times it's pretty stuck on there. Not really reusing this ring gear typically unless you want to save it, so you can be kind of hard on it and not feel bad. Let's see it. In this case, I don't really give a shit because we're not going to be reusing either of these, but I just wanted to show you guys. Alright, next on the agenda is the pinion nut. Everybody just doing a two-way installation can skip this part, but it's a 30 mil. Slides right on there. 30 fits pretty good. Could probably use some different standard socket sizes. Like, it's pretty big, so I usually just hold it with my hand. Rip that sucker off. There it is. Alright, so after you've removed the pinion nut, you're left with the pinion itself. We're going to be replacing this component. It doesn't come out, so you have to press this out. Some people will hammer it out. They'll use an air hammer. We have a press here at the shop, so I'm going to take you guys over there and show you how I remove this. Alright, so we got the diff in the press, and it's pushing on the pinion. If you're going to reuse it, you can put the pinion nut on there to help keep it from mushing the threads, but it's usually fine just to start cranking her down. And they're usually pretty fucking good in there. So, why the hammering technique is a little tough, because I don't know, especially this one. You gotta imagine heat and everything over time, and it's literally a press fit into the bearing. So it's getting pretty close. Usually take this now. It's bottomed out on the flange, so let it back up. Side. Pop the flange out of the way. Still got some pinion there. Line it back up. Now it's just being held up by the bearing specifically. Down. I usually try and catch it so it doesn't just bounce off the ground. There it is. Boom. There's your pinion. This one's pretty toast. It's bad. Piece is just falling off of it, but there it is. Alright, so now we are looking at what would be considered the front of the diff, and we're going to remove this seal. What you're left with is one of the pinion bearings trapped behind the seal, so we gotta pop that out so we can replace the bearing, the seal, and the races inside of the diff. So what I use is this nifty little seal puller. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can hammer on it with a screwdriver or whatever. I like this. I'll move you guys back so I can get a good grip on it. Usually good to get a nice brace and just there it is. Alright, so now that you got your seal out, it's destroyed. You need to replace it. You cannot reuse this. You can pull out one of your last pinion bearing here. This is the one that we were pressing the pinion out of, and as you can see there's a ton of metal in this one, so this one's getting replaced. I don't know if you can see inside here, but yeah, this stuff's pretty beat up. I'm gonna replace these races inside the diff. There's this one here, and then if you look inside, there's also another one here. Alright, so this is your rearward most bearing. Here's the Nissan part number, and it comes with a brand new race. Some people don't replace these. I am going to, and here it is. Comes with the bearing, and this one will be pressed onto the new pinion, and that goes right in there. So there's that guy. And then also, flip this around. We have a new smaller pinion bearing, or front pinion bearing, as I would call it anyway. And that is, I'm mangling this box here. Here's your Nissan part number. This guy. So here's our new race. It's gonna go right in there, and it comes with the pinion bearing. And this one we're just gonna throw in, and we'll press that in with the new pinion. Alright, before we get too crazy with cleaning this up and removing both of those bearing races, we have to remove the side seals. So I'm going to go ahead and use my trusty hook stabby tool again and put it in there. And same kind of deal, you know. Almost there. I'm going to try not to fuck the race up. I guess with iron it's not so bad, but in an aluminum housing these can really mess up the sealing surface, so just be really careful if you are using one of these. that one too. So there they both are. And I will reinstall these after this diff is cleaned up and ready for new parts. So next we're going to press the old bearing off of the pinion. This is the one we removed out of the differential that was full of metal. So I'll show you on this one, but I'm not going to show you the other one just for redundancy's sake. This apparatus is required to remove this. I'm not sure if there's a better way to do it. I've seen people like cut these off and all kinds of crazy shit. I'm not going to do that. So I use the bearing splitter, as it's called. And then we'll just press it off. Oh, one added thing. If you plan to reuse this and you have a bearing splitter, when you start to apply pressure to the pinion, make sure it spins. If it spins, then you're not damaging the cage. If you damage this cage on the bearing, it's pretty much done. You'll get a really noisy bearing, so just a cool little tech tip. This one's about to drop since we're not using this one for the hell of it. I'm just going to let it hit the ground. See if it breaks. Cool. So I just want to go through something with you guys here before we get further along. So this is the pinion we removed from the case that I just took the bearing off of. Alright, so this bearing comes off, bloop, and there is a shim underneath. Put that there so it wouldn't get stuck. This shim is your pinion depth shim. The beveled side will go face down on the pinion. There's a bevel on it. So, here's the trick that I've learned. Take it or leave it. Some people may have different ideas. Always use the pinion shim from the pinion that was in the diff that you're building. So in that case, here's our new pinion. We're going to put this new bearing on it. And I'm going to take the pinion shim from the bearing that was in the case we're building, or from the pinion that was in the case we're building. I'm going to put it on our 4.08 pinion to shim it. That should get us really close, because these pinions are shimmed to the case. So if this was shimming that pinion in the case we were in and it was good, let's see where this gets us, and that's where we're going to start. So I'm going to knock this bearing off of this pinion that we're going to be using and put our fresh one on from Nissan. As you can see, they're different. I'm not really sure where the distributor gets these used gear sets from, but if you were to use this bearing, you'd probably have a bad time. So I'm going to try and use the proper bearing with the new race, and that should work out all fine and dandy. Alright, so this is the 4.08 pinion bearing. Removal in the press with the bearing splitter. So since I'm reusing this one, I've got a nice soft pad underneath, and I've got the nut on here to help save the threads if for whatever reason something happens. I don't want them to get mushed, so we're just removing the bearing. on there pretty good. Looks like there she goes. I'm going to try and catch this one. But I'd rather it not hit the ground, since this is the new part. There she goes. Take that off. Take our nut off now that we're free. Slide it up. And there's your guy. Alright, so we're back at the workbench. Now, I'm going to kind of show you how to dress this thing so we can put the new bearing on there. So this is our new pinion. There's our bearing. See, the bevel side was down. Sorry, not bearing. This is our spacer that was on here originally underneath this guy. As you can see, we'll see it again. These are two different ones. This is the new one. These are junk. New one's in the picture now. This is our spacer we took off the original pinion inside the differential. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to measure how big this thing is to the 100th. I don't know if you can see that, but it's looking to me like 3.15. That is our pinion spacer size. So I'm going to take that bevel side down. It's on there. And then take this guy. He's on there too. You're going to take your spacer, put it on, bearing, slid on. Then you're going to take your tool that you're going to use to press it, slide that on so it's not contacting the cage. It all spins. I slide it through this hole on this press plate here. Make sure everything's squared up. And I like to take this little guy, set him on top of the pinion. Make sure everything's tight. Make sure it's square here. Don't anything weird happening. Squish it down. You're gonna want this fully seated. So it's getting kind of hard, but just keep on pushing until you get bearing fully seated. Really nice little snug. This guy's all snug on there. That thing's fully seated. I want that spacer to be as squished together as possible there. So there we go. Now we have our bearing on our pinion with our pinion spacer. Alright, so next on the agenda here, we're going to start putting things on the two-way carrier assembly. So, to start, we got some brand new side bearings. So we're going to put those guys on. So, the reason I have the carrier next to the diff, if you look inside, you can see the carrier is oriented like this. I don't know if this matters, but this is what I always do. So when I'm putting these on, I want to make sure I match these races up with the bearings depending on the side I put them on. So, this one's going to go on the left side. It's going to go over here. I'm going to make this one my left side. This one's going to be my right side, which means this race is my right side, and this one's my left side. So I forgot my paint marker here. I'm going to mark them. I'm going to write it on the race so I don't forget. Left, right. Alright, so we have our carrier, our bearing, and a couple little spacers and press things in our press here. So you want to find something, again, that doesn't press on the cage of the bearing when you go to press it. I've seen people hammer them on. You can do a lot of different things. Since I have the press, I'm going to use it and start pressing this down, and I'll explain more in a second. It goes down pretty easy. As I was saying, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Alright, so one thing that you want to be sure of going together, so you can press it down, but you have to make sure this is fully seated all the way down, otherwise you're going to have issues with shimming it later on. So I'm going to press both bearings on really quick here. Then we will make sure they're fully seated. Alright, so now I'm going to take that same tool from earlier I used for the pinion. Put that on there. That's going to help me clearance the seat for the bearing and make sure this guy is fully seated. The last thing I want is to have one of these guys not be shimmed properly because of something simple like that. So, as long as you have something that's spaced like that, that you can put around it and clearance that seat and seat the bearing, should be good. So we're going to do both sides really quick. So we've got our bearings on, that's cool. Next is the ring gear onto the carrier. So when you get these ring gears, especially used, you'll notice when you look into the holes that there's like a bunch of Loctite or some kind of thread sealing or hardening stuff. Typically what I do in this situation, before I put it on and start running the bolts into the holes, take some of the old ones. I mean, you're going to typically end up reusing them, it's fine. And just run them in with an impact into the holes before you do your final installation and clean out all this gunk. You can use a pick, whatever you want to do, just something to note, and certainly helps with keeping it on there over time, because this thing gets spinning real fast. Alright, so I ran the bolt through the holes just for all intents and purposes. Look at that. All that stuff that came out of there. I mean, it's pretty clean now, so just a little tech tip I've learned over the years of doing this. Alright, so we got our ring gear, bolts, everything's cleaned up. First things first, you can take the ring gear, try and drop it on there, and once it's on, it should spin pretty much freely on the carrier assembly. Now, before you put these bolts in, it's recommended you use Loctite. Pretty sure you should use the medium strength. I'm going to use the high strength red stuff. Your call. I definitely don't want this thing coming loose, so this is what I use. There's no excuse for these bolts coming loose, so definitely don't want to make that mistake. So make sure these guys are tight. on here. So now I've got 2 of them threaded in. And flip it over. And I'm going to put the rest in. You get the gist. I'll be right back. Alright, so there's a lot of ways to do this. Some people just run them down with the impact on each one and they stay tight. The real torque spec for this is 56 foot-pounds on each one, crisscross pattern, and then 31 to 36 degrees of rotation after that 56 foot-pounds, and you crisscross that rotation. Now, the tricky thing about that is, how do you hold this thing? So I'm going to show you what I do. I'll demonstrate with one of the bolts, and then I'm just going to do them, because otherwise you'd be watching me for, you know, a half hour doing this procedure. So we're going to go back over to the press and I'll show you the procedure. Alright, so we are back here with our favorite friend, the press. So how do we do it? So essentially, this is a holding fixture now for the carrier with all the bolts in it. So what I do is, it shouldn't rotate. Got our 17 mil on there with 56 foot-pounds on our torque wrench. And we're gonna hit it. 56. And you're gonna mark the bolt. And you're gonna go to the next one. 56. We're gonna do this one now. You're going to mark the bolt. And you're going to go to this one. .56. And you're going to mark the bolt. So you get the idea. So you're going to go around, torque each one. So I'm going to do that quick, and then I'll come back and do the angle torque. Alright, we've marked each bolt at 56 foot-pounds of torque. So now we're going to do our angle torque. As you can see, torque wrench is 33 degrees, which means each bolt is going to get a 33-degree rotation. So we're going to start here, get it on there. Start to move this, but 33 degrees. Then you're gonna just mark that bolt. It may spin a little bit in here, and that can throw it off. I usually just give it a little extra pressure when that happens, and hopefully it helps. I mean, this is the best way I've come up with to get the proper torque spec. Alright, so I had the differential housing cleaned up, and now we're ready to install the pinion into the housing with the new bearing and the shim that we installed earlier. You're going to need this, the other pinion bearing that's going to go on there, which is this part number here. It's the smaller pinion bearing. And then you're going to need the crush sleeve for the pinion, which I'll show you how to set up after, and that just slides on like so. Alright, so we're back over at the press. The first thing you're going to want to do is, you've got your races in there, whether you replace them or you're going to reuse them. I replaced these just because they were bad, but you're going to want to make sure they're super clean. So I clean these up beforehand, but I just like to wipe it down one more time, make sure there's no debris on them. And then I take a little bit of gear oil. It doesn't really matter if it is for the two-way or not. You can use whichever one you'd like. Just take a little bit of gear oil. I'm just going to rub it on the race a little bit, give it some something to ride on, you know? And then do that same thing on the inside one. inside of the diff. This one's nice and clean. Cleaned it with brake clean and a rag. Gear oil it up. Get it all ready. All right. Now, this isn't going to be the easiest, but I'll show you. So now you have your front pinion bearing, the smaller one that's not on the pinion yet. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a little bit of gear oil and I'm just going to like rub it in, get it nice and lubed up, clean. It's a fresh bearing. I'm going to drop that guy in there. The front bearing is chilling. Alright, next. Now, this is negotiable. Some people say different things. If you read through the file that shows how to build this, which I will put in the description of the manufacturer specification assembly guide, it does not state whether to install this tool or this seal before or after setting up the pinion preload. So I just install it first to save myself the effort. This is the guy right here. Here is the part number, which happens to just be written on the bag. This is your front seal. I like to put a little gear oil on this guy too, just kind of help lubricate things. You want things to be smooth, you don't want anything to tear. So I put a little bit around the outside edge and a little bit on the inside. Take that guy, and usually drops right in pretty easy. It's not really a super difficult fit, but what you do is you take some kind of drive tool and you just kind of tap it in until it's flush. You'll kind of hear a dead spot when it's fully seated. So I'm going to do that really quick. Alright, the lighting's a little bit better from this side, so I'm going to show you guys from this side, but we tapped our seal in. It's in there nice and flush with the housing, and our bearings inside. So, next, what you're going to want to do is take your pinion flange, right here, and you're going to set it right there on the press. And you're going to take your differential, you're going to guide it onto the flange. Kind of rotates a little bit. It's not super stable, so be kind of careful. In this case, I'm just going to kind of lean it like that. Now, we got our pinion with our spacer. The larger side goes down, and then the slimmer side's right there. I'm going to do what I've been doing, add some lubricant to the bearing. So we lubed our bearing up and kind of work that in there. Maybe put a little bit on the splines, help it slide in there. Alright, so now we're going to take this guy, we're going to slide him right in, and we're going to line up the splines on the flange with the pinion. So now our pinion's down inside, you can kind of see it through the hole there. Alright, so now we're going to press it in. So I'm going to take the little tool here that I use to press things, and I'm going to set it on top of the pinion nice and square, with it going through, splines through the flange, and we're just going to start working it down. And you can see Slowly but surely. You'll start to feel it giving back some resistance. I usually try and take out most of this slack, so I'll keep going. Because at this point we're kind of crushing that crush washer slightly. And you're going to want to get until, see how there's no slack in it? It spins around nice and smooth. No resistance, no slack. Now we're ready to put the nut on the pinion. Alright, so switching surfaces again. Now we're going to install our new pinion nut. You get to see the crazy tool that I created. A lot of people will hit this with an impact wrench, and that's how they get it on there, and they just go tight. I'm not going to do that. You can do that if you want. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this and our 30mm socket. We're going to put this guy on here. Now, what I typically like to do is take some grease. And I take a little bit of grease and I just put it at the base here, where the pinion's going to be riding, just to give it something to glide on. I guess you don't really have to if you're just going to use an impact, but we're going to use a breaker bar and this mechanism that I created to install this. So here we go. So don't get intimidated by its sheer size, but here's the mechanism I created. See if I can get in shot here, but I basically drilled 2 holes in this piece of iron, and I'm going to thread them here into the pinion and just lay it up against this. You can use any kind of surface to push it up against. In this case, I'm just using this lift so that I have something to hold it on. Just take it, and you're just gonna, let's go like that. Essentially, just bolt it on to the flange, so that your flange doesn't rotate, and you can properly tighten down your pinion nut without using an impact. Like I said, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you shouldn't use an impact. So pinion nut goes on, tighten that down. See, now it's held nice and tight. 30 mil. And a ratchet. And here we go. A lot easier than trying to hold it, or having your friend hold it. Just a big ass piece of metal on a wall. We're gonna tighten that. Okay, it's all the way down. There's a torque spec for this. It's in the service guide in the description. The main thing we're looking for, though, is rotational torque, and we're going to use this wrench in order to find that. It uses Newton meters and inch pounds, and we're trying to make a certain amount of resistance in a circle with this. In this case, I think the spec is somewhere between 25 and 30. I'll confirm. I usually try to hit between 25 and 30. So we're just going to tighten this down until we rotate it and see this dial. See if we can get this in focus here. This dial move while rotating it. to right about there. We want it like right here as we're spinning it. Right there. So I'm gonna crank her down now, and then we're just gonna keep testing it and see where we get. I'm gonna get a bigger breaker bar now because it's about to get pretty real. All right, I'm gonna start cranking it down. I think the spec is somewhere between 140 and like 270 or some crazy number. So we're just gonna keep using our bracing mechanism. Tighten this. All right, so I can tell we're getting kind of tight here. I'm gonna see where we're at, and then we're going to show the first rotational pass. All right, so just for the hell of it, I kind of want to show you guys where you start out at. So this is our first turn, and as you can see, there's no resistance on this. So since the bearings are brand new, we're trying to get between that like 25-ish to 30-ish range, and we're nowhere near that. So just for perspective, we're gonna keep going with the brace and tightening it down. All right, so I got the torque wrench out just for perspective. Set that thing to 200, so if it clicks, you know we're really ripping on this thing. Right there. Hang on there. We got some solid turns out of that. We'll check it again. All right, it's gonna be kind of tough to see, but we're right around 10 or 11. You can kind of see it right there. And since these are new bearings, well, it looks like about 13. We're trying to get closer to here. So we want to get it like up in that 25, 30 range. If these were used bearings, it wouldn't be as crucial to get this spec, but since everything's fresh, we're gonna try and get it within the factory spec. All right, so we hit it one more time, and I don't know if you guys can see that, but we are just about right where we want to be, that 25-ish rotational torque spec range. So this is how you set it up. Essentially what we were doing was just crushing the pinion spacer inside to set the preload on these bearings. This way they have the proper preload and you have a nice, quiet, smooth differential. This is the right way to do it. You can just hammer it on with the impact if you want, and you might end up with a noisy pinion, but I don't know. This is the way I do it because I want it to be nice. So one thing I do want to add that I forgot to mention during the process of installing the pinion is the crush sleeve and how it works. So once we had the pinion nut tight and we were bracing the flange against the lift or the wall or whatever you're going to use, essentially what we were doing was crushing down this sleeve to set the preload on the bearings. So if you look at this one, this is a already used crushed pinion crush sleeve, and this one's a brand new one. So as you can see, there is a height difference on those. So that's essentially what you're fighting when you're tightening down that pinion nut, and it's requiring a significant amount of force. Alright, so if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening to me ramble on about this. So we have crushed our crushed sleeve, and our pinion is installed in the housing now. And we have our preload set. So the next thing on our agenda is installing the two-way carrier assembly with the ring gear into this guy. And what's required to do that is shimming it. So this is the thing everybody loves to talk about. I have a big selection of shims here. so I can get the proper backlash spec for the ring and pinion. So I'm gonna show you guys popping it in there. Remember how I had the left side, right side earlier on in the video? This is where it comes in handy because everything is laid out and ready to go in the same side that I took it out of. So we're gonna start out with the shims that it came with and see what kind of backlash we can get from that and go from there. All right, so we're gonna take left side shim, left side race, and put it on our left side. And then I leave the right side shim out, and I take the right side race and I put it on. And I just kind of slide that in there as gently as possible. That way it goes right in. Not a lot of tension on it. And you can at least get that set up. And then I take it and I tilt it on its side so that all the weight's on that left side. Take the right side shim, kind of shove it in there. And then at that point, you gotta kind of tap it in. I just take the hammer and, I mean, if you have a brass punch, that's usually a bit better, but this works. There it is, it's in. Then you have your marked right side. Take that, boom, finger tight. The left side's marked with the L facing up, like that. Finger that in there. We're not going to torque these down until after we get the backlash. So now that it's tight, I usually take it and I give it a quick flip upside down. Like that. It's a little easier to measure on this side. So now we'll get the tool set up so that we can measure backlash. Alright, so we have our dial indicator set up on our ring gear and we're measuring the backlash. So the specification for these differentials is between 10 and 15 thousandths of an inch backlash. So if you look what we have here, we're right about 5 thousandths. So this diff's set up a little too tight. I want to get it to that 10 thousandths mark, so I'm gonna pull the carrier assembly back out, measure the shims, and try and move the pinion slightly away from the ring gear. So we're gonna take the ring gear and we're gonna try and push it this way, which means we need a thicker shim on this side or a thinner shim on this side. So we're gonna pull them out and measure them and see what we can find. All right, so I took the caps off already just for speed. We're pulling shims out. Remember, the diff's still upside down right now. So we're gonna measure the side that I just removed. And you can see we got 2.36. So that's what that side is. Pull this guy up. Here. And then measure him. And we have 2.15. So just because you guys are probably not going to have another set of shims like I have, I'm just going to swap them around to move it away. So take the left side, put it on the right side, vice versa. And then see if that gets us where we need to be, because that's what you guys are going to be capable of doing without purchasing more. So let's see what happens. All right, guys, I switched them around just side to side. And if you look, that puts us at right about 11 thousandths. 10 thousandths, 11 thousandths, which is in specification. And that means it is time to paint the ring gear and look at our gear pattern. All right, so we've painted our ring gear to check the tooth engagement to the pinion. with a nice paintbrush and some AC Delco gear marking compound. You can get this at like most GM dealerships, Chevy, GMC. So we're looking at the ring gear to see if we can get the proper pattern. As you can see here, it's not centered on the gear where you'd want it. It's really far on the inside. Then if you look at the opposite side of the gear, try and get it to focus here. It's really far to the outside of the gear. So there's a few different charts you can look at to depict the proper way to correct this. In this case, we're going to be putting a thinner pinion shim on the pinion. So we're going to remove all that and install a proper shim. I'll show the measuring process once I get the diff disassembled and the pinion free of the bearing and shim. Alright, so we were able to remove the bearing from the pinion and get the shim out of this portion of the pinion that was too large, and I measured it out. If you remember previously in the video, it was 3.15 millimeters. So what I ended up doing was ordering the next 3 smaller sizes. I may have skipped one in between here, so maybe a couple, but we need quite a bit of a slimmer shim. So I got one that's 3.09, 3.07, and 3.04, and there are all the parts numbers, and I just used a caliper to measure them. So I think what I'm going to do is start right in the middle here and see if that gets us close to where we want to be. So we'll just take that guy, beveled side down, slide him on, bearing goes back on. I'm gonna go press this on, I reassemble the differential, put the marking compound on it, and we'll see if that gets us closer to where we want to be with our gear pattern. Alright, so we put the smallest shim in it, the 3.04. After rebuilding it and looking at the pattern a couple times, we ended up with what's considered an acceptable pattern, but it's not centered. At this point we have to run it. That's the smallest shim possible. Should be totally fine, but we're gonna put the cover on it and call it good to go. The cover on there with some gasket maker made specifically for gear oil. This one has a heat sink in it. It's actually a Pathfinder cover. Next we're going to tap the axles back into the carrier. I usually just use a hammer and just tap them in. Well, there it is. The axles are hammered in. I don't know if I want to say hammered, but they're installed. This one we put a Pathfinder diff cover on to add an additional stud for reinforcement. Yeah, so I'm just going to let the sealant dry on the cover and then install the fluid, and then it's ready for the break-in period for the two-way. And that's really it. So if you have any questions, just put them in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer them. This stuff's pretty meticulous as far as the measurements go, so more than happy to help. Thanks for watching and good luck.